All right, so I just had dinner with a friend recently who just got back from the most epic hunting trip I've ever heard about. He and his friends, they went out to Wyoming, and he said they drove out to where there was not a drop of cell phone reception. They had to use satellite phones to call in for emergencies, and so they get on these horses, and he said they rode up the sides of mountains to the top, and they tracked elk all over the mountainside. And my friend, one thing you need to know about him is he's just kind of quiet. He doesn't real talk a lot. He's not really expressive. But when he got back from this trip, he could not stop talking about what he experienced. I mean, he was just so chatty about this experience. Well, some of us have had an experience with Jesus that is so profound, so life-changing, so impactful that we're kind of like our friend, like my friend. We just can't help but talk about it. We just can't talk about what Jesus is doing in our life. And our hope is that because you're here at Collide, you encounter Jesus in such a way that your life changes, that you can't help but go tell your friends about, man, here's how Jesus is making a difference in my life, how he's changing me, he's moving me towards knowing what love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness is, that because you're here, Jesus is making a difference in your heart. And so we want to be able to talk about what Jesus does. But sometimes it's really weird. Like, how do we talk about Jesus in a world that doesn't talk about Jesus a lot? And so the whole thing that we're talking about today is how do we talk about Jesus? How do we share our experience in a way that others will want to listen to it? The first rule of thumb, the first thing you got to think about when it comes time to talk about Jesus is you just got to keep it simple. I mean, telling others about Jesus does not need to be complicated. I'm going to repeat that. Telling others about Jesus doesn't need to be complicated. And sometimes we overcomplicate it because we feel like we got to tell all of these things. And actually, I'm just going to tell you about one of the first guys who ever talked about his experience with Jesus. And one of the first guys who ever talked about his experience with Jesus was this guy named Paul. And Paul wrote a lot of the New Testament. He's one of the very first pastors. And there was this moment that he actually got to go hang out with the king. There's this king named King Agrippa. And I don't know why, but whenever I hear the story about King Agrippa, I always picture King Agrippa like Jabba the Hutt, like this huge man for some reason. Like, I just think King Agrippa is huge in my mind. There's no reason for King Agrippa to be big. It's not in the Bible, but that's what my memories are and how I picture this story. So I always picture like tiny Paul, huge, massive King Agrippa. So Paul gets to tell his story to King Agrippa. And he does this fascinating thing. He actually just says, I used to believe this, then I experienced this, and so now this is what life's like. So get that. Paul's story is, I used to believe this, and then I experienced this, and so now this is my life. All of this, again, is in Acts chapter 26. It's an incredible story you should go read of Paul just saying, so I used to believe this, then I experienced this, and now I believe this. So if you've ever been to one of our baptism weekends, this is how we do this here. I mean, every weekend, if you've ever gone to one of our baptisms, we see the big old pool and people tell stories and we all cry and it's an amazing moment. But every one of those stories follows the exact same pattern that Paul teaches us of before I trusted Jesus, how I trusted Jesus, since I've trusted Jesus. Before I trusted Jesus, how I trusted Jesus, since I trusted Jesus. And so guys, how do we talk about our experience with Jesus? We just keep it simple and we just tell our story. We don't have to convince them of anything. We don't have to prove anything. We don't have to argue anything. We just get to tell them, like, here's what it was like before I trusted Jesus. Here's the fear, the anxiety, the worry, the shame, whatever it was before you trusted Jesus, then what it was like to trust Jesus, and then how he's changed you since you trust him. Man, that's the easiest way to share about our experience with Jesus when people want to know. But one of the things that will lead them to wanting to know about how Jesus has changed you is by how you live. See, at the end of the day, the biggest way that we show that we've been a life changed by Jesus is how we live. The biggest way that we get to share our faith is not in all the words and the posts and the arguments and the things that we say, but it's in how we live. And actually, Jesus told us in John chapter 13, verse 35, he says, your love for one another, how you treat one another, how you behave with each other, how you respond to each other, how you get mad at each other, how you talk about each other behind their backs, how you post about each other, the things you say on Snapchat and Instagram about other people, the way you love one another, that will prove to the world that you're my disciples. That will prove to the world that you are a life changed by him. The way you love is the loudest thing you'll ever say. So, how do we talk about our experience with Jesus? We keep it simple. We just tell our story of before Jesus, how I trusted Jesus, what Jesus has done. And we just do it by loving people. We show Jesus to others by the way we live. Man, guys, we hope that you've experienced Jesus in such a way that has changed your life. And then you have the courage to live differently in front of all your friends and your teammates and your teachers and your family, to where they're sitting there going, what's different about you? And then you get to share the story. Here's how it was before Jesus, how I trusted Jesus, and how he's changed me. And we show Jesus to others by the way we live. And we hope that you get to tell a ton of people about how Jesus has made you a life changed by him.